I'm going to first start off by just giving you very briefly an overview of ERM. We're a leading global environmental consultancy firm with over 35 years of experience. We have a staff of almost 4,000 people and 170 offices worldwide, including 4 in Canada, in Montreal and Toronto, where I share my time, and in Calgary and Vancouver. We provide services across all of the environmental, on all environmental issues, and as it regards sustainability, these are the 5 areas where we focus in. So briefly, defining sustainability. Companies use a number of different terms. They call it sustainability or sustainable development, corporate social responsibility, corporate responsibility, and corporate citizenship. So this essentially means the same thing, which is the triple bottom line of economic growth, environmental stewardship, and social progress. And I've also put up a couple of key definitions, both from the Brundtland Commission, the classical sustainable development definition regarding future generations. And then you have the one for the business for social responsibility that looks at operating business in a manner that meets or exceeds ethical, legal, commercial, and public expectation that society has for business. And the Dow Jones Sustainability Group Index definition, which is a business approach to create long-term shareholder value by embracing opportunities and managing risks derived from economic, environmental, and social developments. So sustainability as a business strategy encompasses a number of various different dimensions, and this is the challenge when it comes to developing a set of indicators. From a global perspective, companies need to recognize that the world is continuously changing. You have economic growth and liberalization of markets. You have technological evolution. So from one year to the next, you may have dramatic improvements in your technologies within your operations, which would ultimately improve your indicators. And as Andres mentioned, even the fact of removing one scope of an operations or a plant closure can also significantly improve your SDIs. You have the increased transparency that society and governments are demanding. You have the rise of the multinationals. You have also growing concerns over environmental degradation, not just within OECD countries, but from a very global perspective. And you have also the increased sophistication and the savviness of advocates and of NGOs. They have a very global reach. And you have a clash of cultures. So all of this needs to fit within that business perspective. And the business perspective is looking at wealth, scope. There's a power and influence and expertise, and as such, you have these new rules, new roles, and rules, I guess, and responsibilities for business. And when it comes to responsibility, there is now also an increasing trend to have a responsible company, and you see it on a number of different environmental reports before you. Even companies now are talking about their responsibility. So they're taking a much more humble approach to sustainable development, and are saying, okay, the buck stops here, and we need to play a much more proactive and responsible role, which is then translated within their metrics and sustainability indicators. Some of the major sustainability issues of today, and I've given the example specifically about Toyota, as we see they're in some trouble these days, but it's dealing with, for example, corporate ethics and governance, fair labor practices, the responsible use of influence. You have climate change and energy security, which is a huge issue today, water and its availability and conservation, which is now also more and more into play in Canada. You have your supply chain performance, and you have your product life cycle impacts. So a mining company, for example, will today not just look at where their impacts lie within their immediate operations, but some of the more forward-looking companies will also look at the use of their metals throughout the product life cycle. And hence it would be also beneficial for them to develop a set of indicators that would encapsulate some of those issues. We also have the increasing pressure, the return on investment. You have covers Fortune magazine where Walmart is looking to save the planet. Where, as many of you are aware, they've come up with their sustainability index, where they've listed a core set of 15 performance indicators, which they are now passing down to their within their supply chain and putting these types of pressures on their suppliers, including as well from their transportation point of view. So one of their biggest transporters is Costco, which is the Chinese shipping company, where they need to attempt to green their shipping practices. You have the Carbon Disclosure Project, which essentially companies that do sign up to this now have to report on their greenhouse gas emissions in a very public way. And the numbers of reporting companies are increasing year by year. And you have, for example, like the Green Building Council, both in the U.S. and Canada, where are very much demonstrating the cost savings through the greening of buildings in terms of energy savings all the way down to the waste cost savings. Some of the drivers for environmental stewardship are your resource efficiency, product innovation, brand differentiation, and facilitation through engagement. So basically the social license to operate. Some of the major trends that we have today are the issues of life cycle assessment, and it's really taken off in Europe and is slowly starting to come to Canada as well. The advocacy part, where you have the U.S. CAP, so the United States Climate Action Partnership, and those are all the members of U.S. CAP, where they are basically advocating for a federal cap and trade system. And you have a lot of the work that's being done with green building, and even which has also trickled down to the banking sector. For example, Van City in Vancouver has established a set of mortgage rates. So if you're building a certain type of a residential home that encapsulates some of these green features, you can have a preferential green mortgage. So these are some of the trends that are very, very holistic approaches that are more and more coming into play today. And some of the more forward-thinking companies like Unilever, for example, they've established an extensive water strategy, which looks at its water consumption, the water associated with the use of its products, in terms of like its detergents, and advocacy for sustainable water practices, which, if you look at it from a very cost point of view, it really does make a lot of business sense in terms of the types of products which they are putting on the market. And there's a number of different initiatives which are springing up, like the Clinton Global Initiative. These are some of the projects where Microsoft, for example, is looking to develop online tools for 40 of the world's largest cities in order to monitor greenhouse gas emissions. There are 1,100 U.S. mayors, and they have teamed up with Walmart and 25 manufacturers in order to encourage the use of green products. The city of Chicago is looking to green the Sears Tower and the Merchandise Mart. And the U.S. Green Building Council is establishing green schools programs that derive energy performance. So most organizations do have a lot of values, although some of them do remain somewhat lofty. So how does that organization assure that its values are embedded into the way it does business, and then hence translated into sustainability indicators? So in terms of metrics, some of the key questions which should be asked are, it needs to inform business decisions. It needs to promote learning and demonstrate the business case. Does it support the business strategy? Does it engage employees and external stakeholders? Does it respond to issues identified by stakeholders? Does it look to change the behavior of individuals? And does it help to integrate sustainability thinking into the organization's culture? And finally, does it reflect business values and yield high benefits? So if you're looking at implementing a performance-based program, it's a 5-step program. Well, this is sort of the ERM model, and where you would identify where your environmental aspects lie. You then create your baseline performance. You select your indicators, and you establish tracking systems, and you establish targets. In terms of selecting indicators, you may want to select indicators depending on the different types of a company, either with your stakeholders, or you establish those indicators internally, and then you communicate those to stakeholders. So there's different methods of going about. So it essentially deals with creating a path forward, and you need to establish a process, and you respect that process. So every company and industry has issues that are unique to them that also may impact their reputation. So a company needs to know what are the material issues. So you need to know your impacts and how to engage internally. So the first step is the assessment. So you look at your impacts, where your opportunities lies, and the risks. Then you have your strategy and the approach and priorities, the mobilizing action, and finally it's the implementing change. So when we talk to a number of our clients, and myself coming from a corporate sector, I worked with the aluminum industry for a long time. One of the things that you want to look is to determine where you are. So along that line, you need to look at a company and say, where does this company lie? Are they in the denial and discovery phase? So they just focus on a green agenda, but it is very difficult for them to move beyond the learning. Are they on the defensive side? So they're just looking for the license to operate and are really looking at risks and expectations. Or are they on the offensive? So looking at creating value for customers, shareholders, and employees. Or are they much more of a transformative type of an organization where a game-changing issue is the business model? And this requires relevance, timing, and champions. And there's a huge focus on values, culture, and worldview. So this is the more forward-looking approach. Companies talk a lot about the triple bottom line, but mainly the focus tends and still continues to be very much on the environmental dimension. So on the environmental stewardship, those are the issues that are listed. And when you develop your SDIs, you need to look at the 3 pillars, and hence the social aspect also needs to be very much embedded. So in terms of the path forward, you would look at, you start with your internal engagement. There needs to be a very high-level commitment from the executives. You need to engage employees. There's a very large part of education that is involved, and you ask where you don't tell. So I'm just going to skip forward to these slides over here, where you look at the company value can be seen as sort of like an iceberg. So the top part is your balance sheet, and the bottom part is your market capitalization. And the bottom part is what lies beneath the water. You really don't see it. But that's where a lot of the risks stand. So if you divide that, you have the top part, the financials, and the bottom part are the non-financials, including your brand image, reputation, and your stakeholder relationships. In 1981, the financials still was a very predominant part of the overall business picture, and the non-financials really did not play such a huge role. That has dramatically changed in 1998, and it still continues to do so because you have a very large sea of demanding stakeholders. So on the non-financial side, you have trade associations, you have the public, you have environmental groups, governments, customers, you have investors, where we've even seen in some of my clients, you have some shareholder activism where even some of their shareholders are going to these companies and saying, hey, wait a minute, this project you are doing in Chile, there's a lot of protests within the local communities. Are you sure this project is going to go ahead? So shareholders are starting to ask a lot of questions. So this is where a lot of your risks lie, and these are very difficult to capture within the scope of your sustainability indicators, which need to be examined. The issues are huge. There's the rise of NGO activism and so forth, and there is very much an awakened public concern. You have what is called the Goracle factor from Al Gore. So you have, weird weather events and so forth that have awakened public opinion. There's 70 to 80% of consumers saying they are switching to green companies. 25% of them actually did in 2009. And you have what is called the LOHA, so Lifestyles of Health and Sustainability sector, which is reported to reach $845 billion by 2015. And everybody's playing the green card. Time Magazine has reported on it, even Sports Illustrated. I think the Montreal Canadiens offset all of the trips that they take between their hockey games. Everybody's part of these issues. So again, going back to this two-part business case, how do you make the business case for these risks, which is important. The GRI have established a number of set of indicators, which sometimes do not always tell the whole picture. Companies, at the end of the day, also determine which are the indicators that they would like to report on. Some of those high-impact indicators, and I fight with my clients sometimes to have them report on those indicators, and they say, no, we don't want to report on them because this is where the biggest environmental impacts lie, and we don't want to have too many people know about them. So the whole issue of transparency becomes, again, quite lofty. So when you're looking at your GRI reporting principles, these are it's in the first column that I look at, in terms of your materiality issues, your stakeholder inclusiveness, what is the context, whether or not the indicators are complete. There needs to be a very good balance. They also need to be comparable. They need to be accurate. There need to be clear and reliable indicators. And these are some of the characteristics of sustainability leaders today. And it really deals with embedding some of these issues within your management systems to really create a culture of transparency, to have a culture of engagement, looking at issues from a global perspective, because products do travel around the globe. There was a project that was done by Danone in Europe, where they looked at the yogurt cup and what was the footprint of this cup of yogurt from the moment it was built or produced rather until final disposal, and it had traveled like thousands of kilometers in the European region. So when you're picking products from the shelf, they come from all over the place. You need to demonstrate leadership and humility in terms of no greenwashing. Stakeholder engagement, this is the new media. You have the growth of Facebook and YouTube. There are a number of demonstrations going on within Facebook. There's a site, for example, Alcoa or Not. There's where they're demonstrating against an Alcoa project in Greenland, and the reach is humongous. So you have this news, the social media dimension is growing substantially. And in terms of some of my concluding remarks, it's to say that sustainability indicators do not always provide the whole picture. It is important to monetize the value of stakeholders in order to determine who has the influence over these new dynamics. Sustainable reporting can assist organizations to evaluate where they stand. Transparent indicators, and to include both traditional EHS indicators and the external risk factors, are very important. It is also important in terms of determining what is material to an organization. You need to have, of course, the top-level commitment. There needs to be a cross-functional team, so it's not just something that is done by your government affairs or your public affairs people. You need to have extensive internal engagement. There's a whole continuous engagement, and the strategy really needs to be built from the bottom up. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you.
So certainly sustainability measurement and reporting is important. And it's one of the primary responses that businesses have had, or they've given thus far, to the challenges of sustainability. Sustainability reporting seeks to situate the role of business in sustainable development and identify its responsibilities. What's our responsibilities as a business and the actions in addressing those challenges of sustainability? The value of measurement as a response to these challenges rests on the important assumptions that the more measures and more information that we have will lead to better sustainability management inside the company. And these are formed on those kind of well-worn business precepts that go back to the time, I think, of the Greeks and Seneca, with the idea that if you don't know where you're located and where you're coming from, you won't be able to define where you're going to go, or whether you're even heading in the right or wrong direction. And the second one, and I think we heard it even this morning from Joanne, about what gets measured gets managed. And so that forms the basis for the importance of measurements and reporting in this area. But they only deal with one element of accountability in terms of internal accountability inside the organization. Equally, there's also an external accountability that we want to look at, and that's the accountability of stakeholders outside of the organization. At the same time, we need to be cautious, and I think we've heard a number of those tones, certainly in some of the presentations even this morning or in the workshop groups, about embracing measurements and indicators as our only salvation, as they may not always deliver a sustainable future that we all want. And for that, I can think of another better example of BP, in particular 5 years ago this very month, an explosion with British Petroleum in March 23rd of 2005. It presents one particular cautionary tale that comes to us. Now, BP is well known as perhaps a pioneer in these areas of measurements. Coming from a European perspective, have been much more engaged on rather than compliance, more in terms of putting measures in head, and been advanced certainly in terms of the whole sustainability reporting agenda as well. And yet, we can see that the BP Texas City refinery experienced a catastrophic process accident 5 years ago. It was one of the most serious workplace disasters in the U.S., with 15 deaths and 170 serious injuries. In the aftermath of the accident, BP followed the recommendations of the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board, and they formed an independent panel chaired by the former Secretary of State, James Baker, and set to study out and did a thorough review of the company's corporate safety culture, its safety and management systems, and the corporate safety oversight at all of its U.S. refineries. The resulting report, published in 2007, was damning of BP in many ways, and many aspects of BP's operation. And notable were its conclusions on measurements and on the topic of measurement. And so just reading from one of those studies, it says, BP primarily used injury rates, and we saw that this morning in terms of what an important indicator that has been to a number of Canadian reporters, I think, in the study that Dr. Searcy is doing. BP primarily used injury rates to measure process safety performance at its U.S. refineries before the Texas City accident. Although BP was not alone in its practice, BP's reliance on injury rates significantly hindered its perception of process risk. BP tracked some metrics relevant to process safety. Apparently, however, BP did not understand or accept what this data indicated about the risk of a major accident. As a result, BP's corporate safety management systems for its U.S. refineries does not effectively measure and monitor process safety performance. So here you have an example of a particular area. So clearly what happened at BP was an example of a measurement failure. And this was not an insignificant issue. When we look at all of the kind of sustainability issues, certainly this one must be a core issue. This is not someone that adds on the side. This is something that's fundamental, perhaps one of the most significant sustainability indicators facing a company, the health and safety of their employees. So what went wrong? Well, in three areas we can see, well, certainly, arguably, we had that BP failed to listen to its stakeholders on the ground, those who knew the problems and the risks. They failed to understand the complexity of the issue and the scope of the measure, and they failed to respond to the signs that seemed to challenge the measure, i.e. the measure kind of stood out as the most important element, and anything that challenged that information didn't make itself into it. So these are important kind of cautionary tales for us. There were congressional hearings, there were investigations, and pages of written reports. And what it boiled down were these three elements here of to listen, understanding, and responding. So I'd like to hold on and remember those, because I think we'll come back to those and we'll revisit those later. What becomes abundantly clear in all of this is that in order to be successful, in order to plot a successful path towards sustainability, measurement must be tied to an overarching accountability framework and bolted on. And so it's important to note that accounting is not the same as accountability. And sometimes I think we overlook that too quickly in our kind of a rush to grab and harness those measurements and indicators. Unless we have significant strengthened accountability mechanisms within organizations, such as business or indeed governments, we can have the best measures in the world technically, but they're not going to advance further towards where we're going to go in terms of sustainability or sustainable development over the long term. So what is accountability? Well, for many, accountability is a rather nebulous topic, a nebulous subject, right? We all want more of it, and it's all there, and certainly if you're anywhere within the distance of a federal government officer at this point, it's certainly the word du jour. But we have two elements of that. In terms of accountability can be those more structured elements that we have, between a kind of representative model that we have there on your left, where a relationship exists when a principal delegates that authority. So that responsibility that you're taking on has been delegated. And so that's a more kind of traditional model, usually with an employment element. You have to meet these certain measures or indicators, or else you lose your job. Then we have moved to the other element in terms of what we're thinking more in terms of sustainability, is that suddenly you have responsibilities to people you never knew you had that relationship with. And so where the individuals have not delegated authority to the organization, they didn't say to a corporate organization in their community, we're now making you responsible for our health and safety or for the environmental particulates in this area. But that has been taken on, and so now they have an implicit responsibility or accountability relationship with them. Now, one particularly interesting definition of accountability comes from an organization in the UK called One World Trust, which I find particularly useful. And so they define accountability as the process through which an organization makes a commitment to respond and to balance the needs of stakeholders in its decision-making process and activities, and to deliver against that overall bearing commitment. So we can see that it's not simply a kind of a measurement element, but it's almost that implicit relationship with stakeholders. So now there are a number of dimensions of accountability, and these may include elements of transparency, elements of participation, an evaluation process, which we often think about those performance indicators that we evolve, and finally a feedback mechanism, and a mechanism that which allow us or to complain or to feed back into the process to say that we don't necessarily agree with those measures, indicators, or the process in which it's taken up. So those kind of elements are all part of it. An understanding of those accountability have been advanced by many organizations, such as One World Trust, and indeed Accountability, the organization which I represent as well. In 2008, Accountability released the Accountability Principles. That's the booklet that you see there, and the Accountability Principle Standards. And based on those three principles of a foundation element of inclusiveness, materiality, and responsiveness. And these principles demand that an organization actively engages with its stakeholders, fully identifies and understands the sustainability issues, and that will have an impact on its performance, including its economic, environmental, and social, and longer-term financial performance. And then use that understanding in terms of developing a responsible business strategy and a performance objectives. So that's the kind of the starting point that we would get even before a kind of a pre-indicator or measurement element that we've taken. So let's examine these principles a little bit further. What I'm going to do is set up some of the principles and then come back to some case studies that we can relate on. So starting off with a foundation principle of inclusivity. The first principle. Do they invite participation, or do the measures themselves? We're asking here, do measures reflect stakeholders' interests? Do they invite participation and active engagement of both internal and external stakeholders in the design analysis of the measures? Or is it just a bunch of so-called experts? We saw Enrico give a similar kind of presentation of that, the importance of having bolt on the stakeholder engagement element in working and identifying, selecting, and designing the indicators at the same time. Don't forget, however, sometimes that the experts can see something very different than people on the ground. I'm reminded of a case, of a situation just recently in the last year and a half where I was working in Thailand with a power group. And they had groups that represented, you know, the great unwashed masses of the community and those who were in poverty areas. And so they were typically represented by academics because, you know, they can still show up and we feel more comfortable speaking with them. And so the trade-off for them was that we were going to deliver energy for the first time into this village in Thailand. Well, this village in Mekong, in terms of the trade-off for them for this particular hydro project along the Mekong, was that they were no longer going to be having the same problems in terms of the fisher folk in that community. So you need to invite the participation active in terms of defining what those indicators are. Are the measures transparent and accessible, or is it a black box formula? You know, is this something in terms of some governance element has cooked up, or are you again making those transparent, allowing us to see what's inside that black box? Transparency International, in terms of its index of measures, makes that completely transparent, allows people to play and work with those composite indicators that you can use with that. Does the process allow stakeholders to influence how you measure, are used and interpreted in terms of employee engagement scores? Do we understand those measures? Sometimes, in one case, it happened where the question was, usual question is, do you receive sufficient tools for training in this organization? And people, they reacted negatively to that question, and the outcome of that was not that they didn't receive enough tools, but no, they received too many. They didn't want, so that was the only opportunity on that scorecard for me to react to it was that, no, we're just, whatever these tools are, I haven't received, not too many of them, but I'm receiving as many. So our stakeholders, are they an important part of it involving that? A quick case study was that with Tradecraft, for those who might not be familiar, a European-based group, essentially similar to the kind of 10,000 villagers that we have here in Canada, a company which aims to fight poverty through approaches to trade that help poor people in developing countries. They had a concept in terms of developing their social accountability reporting on what constituted fair wages, right? So you sit here and scratch your head, what be fair wages? So the senior management came up and approached this and said, well, this is something that's very important to us, an organization, if this is our mission and mandate. So we're going to set out what we think would be there. But when they put this and consulted with the people on the ground of the non-senior managements, they said, well, no, how you're using to develop these scores or indicators on fair wages aren't the same how we're looking at it as well. So you had senior management who are looking at external benchmarks and jobs involving similar tasks, because from their view, they said, well, we're looking at the market rates in the community and said, you are getting those market rates. Therefore, they're fair wages. But from the perspective of the employees, they said, well, some of the lowest people who are being paid on these projects actually are still open or are still eligible for income support. And so they're not actually even reaching the poverty levels in those countries. So where you're using a benchmark for what's existing in that country, it doesn't even reach the poverty level. So we have a problem here in terms of understanding what is a fair wage. And this is, again, something that's interesting when we come to a Canadian context also of understanding a sustainable wage and those all sorts of different kind of formulas for that. But the important part of this case study is really that often the debate itself can be valuable. And sometimes I think we think of measures as being the end goal, whereas really it's the dialogical approach in terms of understanding what accountability is going to mean, what sustainable development is going to mean, because these are a contested area. Particularly when there's areas from social, environmental, and economic, not everyone's going to want the same things. The second principle is that of materiality. Are the measures relevant that we're looking at? Or have we just hoisted all of these measures into a group and say, come what may, you figure it out on your side in terms of our stakeholders out there. But it doesn't give me a sense that they really get it. Do they really understand? And it also deals with the issue of boundary issues, which you talked about earlier, in terms of materiality. Okay, measures can show us one thing about the water waste, for example, but do they really look at the bigger picture? So here is a quick case study of Investus as a commercial property group in Australia, and how they defined what were their most important issues for them in terms of material issues. And they used a kind of simple matrix, a kind of upside-down matrix, which is interesting because I think they're from Australia, so they look at things upside down. And they've used a kind of control and impact elements. And so on that upper right-hand quadrant, you'll see what they defined as their most important issues. And again, this was a transparent process. So seemingly, that's where their indicators would evolve and lie there. So questions like energy, water, health and safety, pollution and wastewater, and workforce training. But if you take workforce training, so what are the measures for workforce training? Is it the number of hours spent on training it? Is it the spend? Or is it some more composite indicator that really wants, what are the issues there that we really understand? The issues is that, well, there might not be people who are trained that are possible, for the next, in order to supply us with sufficient workforce in that area. So here, in terms of some areas, in terms of missions and materiality, we want to focus on the most relevant and significant issues. We don't want to let the tail wag the dog. We want to keep the eye on the issue, not the measure. And so here, for example, we have a number of finance operations and banks, which, because they're there, the indicators are there in terms of, what their own, GHG footprint is internally into the operation. But really, when we think of impact, for a financial institution, their biggest impact is on who they are lending to, not on how much electricity that TD is using to run its branches or its ATMs, but what are the bigger picture issues. And I think that's what we have to transfer over. We don't want to shy away from the qualitative data because really this can often be much more material anyway to us, and certainly investors are looking more at that. And we don't start just using the GRI's indicator as a pick-and-choose menu. In the principles within the GRI, and people sometimes skip over these points, the important principles that they have in the GRI, they trump the indicators. Unfortunately, businesses often start with the indicators and work themselves backwards. So it's important to kind of turn that on its head. And finally, that of responsiveness. Are measures linked to actions? This is the wow factor. This is where the rubber hits the road. And this is where we want to know, are these indicators, do they have a part that follows them on? Are they linked to decision making? And our example there looks at Advanced City, where they are developing measures and report back on their performance, linking each measure to an executive in the company, to the point where actually they link the name of the individual in the company. So you are now responsible for our satisfaction in that area. They're also in terms of a measurement development process, which is embedded into the governance function. And this is a key part in terms of measurements don't exist on their own, that they're embedded into a governance function. And I think we could have a whole different kind of exploration on that whole issue as well. Then they're integrated not only at one level, and that the person who writes the sustainability report or the sustainability management collects all this data, but that they're actually embedded and incorporated into the business strategy and planning department. So it's not just the sustainability sustainability department, and that channels and measures are channeled into the learning and improvement. So as a conclusion, there can be an overemphasis on measurement, and we've made simply lead us down the garden path. Accountability mechanisms lie at the root of effective measurements and need to be hardwired into sustainability plans. A measurement and evaluation function is a fabulous way to be part, but it is a part of the function of an accountability framework. But we also require these other elements of adequate disclosure and transparency, of meaningful participation by stakeholders, and the feedback and complaints handling process when measures are being wrongly used or interpreted. Thank you very much for your time.
I'm going to give the perspective from somebody inside an organization on sustainability measurement and reporting. So I'll give you a 2-second overview of RBC, it won't be long. I'm going to talk about why companies measure sustainability, which has been touched on already, so I won't dwell on that. Who cares? In other words, another view on why would you measure. Setting priorities, which is a driver for choosing your metrics. How do you measure success? How do you report? And some thoughts on what I see coming next. So here's the RBC commercial. Big bank, 5th largest in North America, 13th largest in the world by attrition. We used to be 22nd largest in the world very, very short while ago. We have actually been tracking and reporting on sustainability for a number of years. It also leverages nicely from one of the traditions in banking and in other large corporations, which is financial measurement and reporting. So I wanted to start with that and a little bit of a recap on why would you measure and report on financials, because I think it's an interesting contrast to sustainability reporting. The bottom line with financial reporting is that really all the user groups are looking for one thing. They want to find out whether the company is capable of generating cash flow over the long run. A lot of different stakeholders use financial reports, but at the end of the day, that is one thing that is fairly similar among them. However, sustainability measurement and reporting is quite different. First of all, it has a much shorter history. It's still evolving, I guess. The objectives for sustainability reporting, I would say, are also a lot mushier. If you look up sustainability reporting objectives in the consulting context or in other organizations, there are any number of reasons why companies say they report on sustainability. Certainly, users of sustainability reports can cross the gamut, or at least a subsection of all of those different users of financial reporting. But the difference is that the people who read and use sustainability metrics are all looking for something different. So given that your users of sustainability measurement and reporting information are all looking for something different, you really need to consider why you would want to do sustainability reporting. What's in it for your organization? What is it that you're trying to get at? So yes, you do want to inform your stakeholders of progress in your sustainability programs. And you also, in the case of a publicly traded company, are going to want to make sure that your investors who are looking for socially responsible investments, which is a subset of the investment world, know what or have the information they need to make good choices. But you also use this information to track your progress, to benchmark against other organizations, to demonstrate your commitment. And in the case of banking, unlike unlike every other sector that I can think of in Canada, financial institutions in Canada are actually federally regulated to produce a public accountability statement that demonstrates their benefit to Canada's economy and society. So at RBC, we've had a formal corporate responsibility report since 2003. So given that you want to first and foremost satisfy your own needs, you do still want to think about your stakeholders. And the interesting thing about stakeholders, as I mentioned earlier, is that they all care about different sustainability indicators. This is our analysis of what our stakeholders care about. Basically, it ranges from employees who care at least a little bit, probably, about all of the indicators, economic, environmental, social, and governance, to NGOs who seemingly don't care that much about the economics, but care a lot about environmental and social and somewhat about governance issues. Of course, it varies depending on the individuals, but as a group, this is our observation about the various ways that different stakeholders might want to see information and might be looking for different kinds of information. So at the end of the day, the thing that drives the way that you measure and report on your sustainability progress, and by the way, I should say I'm talking about sustainability in its broadest sense. I'm not just talking about environmental sustainability, although I will drill down and talk about environmental sustainability in a second. But the bottom line is that in selecting what you want to measure and report on, it should be a reflection of the corporate priorities in this space. So, in other words, your priorities for reporting are simply the metrics that describe how you are achieving your goals and your objectives in corporate responsibility. So, for example, at RBC, our corporate responsibility vision has 5 components. It has to do with a positive economic impact, creating a workplace of choice, operating with integrity, supporting community causes, and promoting environmental sustainability. And within each of those priority areas, there are a number of goals. And within each of those goals, our corporate responsibility reporting, our financial reports, and our websites have certain metrics and certain qualitative discussions of how we are moving towards achieving those goals. So these would be the goals to do with governance and ethics. And this would be primarily found in the financial reports and on websites, although it is also discussed in our formal corporate responsibility report. Economic impact, there's information about how we provide a return to shareholders, paying taxes, fostering small business, etc. Workplace priorities include diversity, which is a huge corporate responsibility priority of RBC, employee engagement, etc. Those are covered extensively in CR reporting in the website, including discussion of all the metrics. And then how we contribute to communities, donations and sponsorships, and encouraging employees to contribute either financially or through their time. But I'm going to spend a little bit of time now talking about environment, which is another one of the priority areas. So in terms of deciding how we're going to report and what we're going to report on, we go back to our priorities. And what our priorities are set out in the RBC Environmental Blueprint. We selected 3 priority issues, which pretty much cover everything, but climate change, biodiversity, and water as the environmental issues of interest, and 4 priority activities within our programs. Number 1 is reducing our environmental footprint. Number 2 is how we lend money, responsible lending. Number 3 is designing and offering green financial products and services as the markets desire them. And number 4 has to do with outward-looking initiatives, engaging with communities, research, stakeholder engagement, etc. So given that those are our priorities on environmental sustainability, it helps us to decide how we're going to measure success and how we're going to report on it. I think that the key pieces of proper measurement and reporting of environmental success include things that you see on the screen. Number 1 is, as another speaker pointed out, you need to select meaningful indicators. And I'll drill down into that in a second. You also want to make sure that you select indicators for which you have good data. It's all very nice to aspire to report on something, but if you have no way to measure it and your quality of data is crap, you frankly are not going to know whether you improved from year to year or whether the variation in your data is just causing numbers to go up and down. You also want to make sure that you have broad data coverage. So in our case, we have operations in mostly Canada, the US, the Caribbean, and the UK. It's an evolution, but certainly our aspiration is that we want to be able to report globally. So if we only have data for an initiative or for something that's global, but we only have the data for Quebec, we're not going to report on it. We might do an informal information piece in Quebec about that piece of data, but certainly when you set out to do sustainability reporting, there's a lot of work to be done on making sure that you cover the scope of your operations and your footprint. Another piece of it, of course, is reporting on things for which you have targets and being able to measure your progress quantitatively towards those targets, and then ultimately using that information to benchmark yourself against your previous performance to see whether you're improving or not, but also benchmarking against your peers and your competitors. So talking about meaningful indicators, I'm going to give you some examples of the way that we selected and reported on some of our meaningful environmental indicators. So there's a number of levels of reporting, and one of them is a summary level. So if you look at our corporate responsibility report or our corporate responsibility review, which is a little pamphlet that summarizes the 83 pages of the CR report, it includes vital statistics for each of the sustainability or the CR priority areas. So on environment, we report on 4 indicators, and we probably will report on another one in future. But essentially, they cover 3 indicators on footprint, 1 indicator that has to do with responsible lending, and probably next year we'll add an indicator on dollar value of products, green products and services offered. But this is like the executive summary for people with very little time and a short attention span who just want to know what are the key points, and these are also the things that are most important to us as an organization. The next level of reporting has to do with progress reports. So this is also sort of qualitative information, and what we do here is that we report on how we did against what we set out as our annual goals. So every year we say what 10 or a dozen things that we want to accomplish in the coming year on environment, and then we report on how we did on those things. So, for example, in our 2009 Corporate Responsibility Report, we reported on what the commitment was that we made, how we thought we did on it. So it's either not very good, partially there, so the pale gray dot on the bottom line would be the partial, and then a solid dot is we've really achieved what we wanted to. So this is another way of demonstrating how you've reported and how you've progressed in some of your key projects for a year. And then for the data junkies, we have all kinds of information about quantitative data. So we have information on energy, paper, travel, and greenhouse gas emissions, which represent our operational footprint. We tell people, actually one of the important things with these measures is normalizing them. So it's all well and good to report your aggregate emissions of whatever, let's say energy, but if you're a growing organization or conversely a shrinking organization in terms of number of branches or number of employees, it's more meaningful to actually report on that data on a per square foot or a per employee basis so that as your organization grows, you can still see if your numbers went up just because you acquired another bank. That doesn't really count. It should be a measure of how you're doing on a per square foot basis or in some cases on a per employee basis, which is what we use for things like paper. Similarly, in the responsible lending and green products and services buckets, we also have quantitative data on a number of different metrics. Numerical benchmarks that we can actually measure, report on, and compare to our previous performance. In many cases, actually, there is no way to compare this to other banks. I think this is one of the challenges of sustainability reporting is that there really isn't, it isn't like financial reporting. There is not a common language, there are not common metrics, and data is notoriously uncomparable between organizations and absolutely uncomparable among sectors. So we often use this information to benchmark ourselves against ourselves and see whether we're going in the right direction on the priorities that we have set out for ourselves. Another one of those on environment is community engagement. So we also track a number of metrics related to how we're engaging publicly on environmental issues. We monitor things like, of course, donations to environmental causes, website hits, stakeholder meetings. There's some really interesting data that we and a number of large companies can get on brand and image, which is pretty interesting because a lot of sustainability programs are actually reputationally driven in many organizations. And I think it's useful to see if you are getting that reputational lift that you think you should be getting for the amount you're investing. Companies like Ipsos and Angus Reid do brand monitors and a number of different studies. We do employee surveys just to see how reputation is tracking against some of the programs you've set out. Lots of different ways to report. In our organization, we basically leverage many of them. Certainly, there's environmental and corporate responsibility information available on the public website. On our corporate responsibility website, last year we launched a customized PDF generator. So this is a tool that where you have a whole bunch of different corporate responsibility information about the environmental, the economic, the social aspects on your site, and the user of the site basically ticks boxes highlighting which parts of the corporate responsibility story they care about from a list of, say, 20 things, and they tick the boxes and press go, and it spits out a report that only tells you about those things that you ticked, so you don't have to read all 83 pages and the whole website if you don't feel like it. And then, of course, we do our annual CR report and a public accountability statement. We also went to an online-only version of that this year. It's, of course, much cheaper. It saves a lot of trees. And again, most people don't want to read all 83 pages, so they can read it online and they can read what they need and print out what they need. But we do publish the little pamphlet I held up, which is the Corporate Responsibility Review summary, which is a nice thing to hand people, especially when you have a retail presence as we do in branches and so on. The other way that a lot of large companies do sustainability reporting is ad hoc sustainability surveys. We hate these because every researcher from some obscure university in maybe Austria, they always seem to be from Europe, has some research project where they're trying to get sustainability information, and could we please just take an hour and answer their survey? And, they all want to know something different. We don't know the benefit to our organization of sharing that information. We do piles of reporting already. So for the most part, we say, we really think what you're doing is fantastic. Here's our CR report, and here's our website, and give us a call if there's anything missing. And then, of course, a lot of the sustainability information is also found in conventional financial reports. The quarterly reports to shareholders, the annual report, and management proxy circular, for example, particularly on the governance side, but also environmental risk management, workplace issues. A lot of those things are covered because they are viewed as financially material aspects of sustainability. So thinking about what's coming next, at least for us, I see a number of trends. Certainly one that's well underway, and I think it's going to be happening for a lot of organizations, is a shift away from hard copy reporting to electronic disclosure. Electronic disclosure is a lot more convenient because you can make changes, you can update things periodically. It doesn't cost tons of money and resources, and it frankly doesn't have a huge environmental footprint, as does printing out tens of thousands of copies of an 83-page report and mailing them to people, which is what we used to do. We also think that this idea of a report generator for users to customize the report they get is something that can be a really handy tool for large companies who do a lot of reporting. I think the other thing that we're seeing is it's really important to manage an increased volume of inquiries on sensitive environmental topics. In the last year, well, probably the last 6 months, we've had a lot of inquiries about oil sands and about banks financing the energy sector, oil sands. So a lot of one-off inquiries, some very good questions, well thought out, very sincere, some crazy. But the bottom line is that it's something important to decide on how you are going to address one-off inquiries, when to answer them with, it's not a small feat to decide whether to answer with a significant amount of research put into it and whether a form letter is appropriate or no response. For a large company, this is actually significant because the volume can be high. The other thing related is establishing criteria to screen surveys and requests for more detailed information, such as the researchers from European universities and other researchers who are looking for information. So how do we decide whether it is something that we should do or not? And then I think one of the things that we're certainly pushing and we're working on is I think that sustainability measurement and reporting has to be subject to more rigorous assessment of what really matters. The problem, as I pointed out, is every stakeholder is interested in a different thing, and that's great, but it means that the things that a good sustainability reporter has to provide are massive. Is that reasonable? And the other thing is that a lot of users or a lot of requesters of sustainability, and I can speak on environmental sustainability information, they're asking for things that we are quite confident are not financially material for us anyway. They may be financially material for some sectors, and I think there has to be a much better job done of having a very sector-specific assessment of what is financially material, what non-financial indicators are financially material, and it's going to be very different from sector to sector, and I don't think enough work has been done on this. I think that we're still getting subject to massive requests for thousands of pieces of information, of which a very small amount of it may actually be material. So this is going to have to change, and I think it's starting to change as more people with financial backgrounds are getting into the sustainability space and seeing opportunities. So that's about it. I guess my observation is that if you want to be considered a sustainability leader, you've got to do a lot of reporting. So that's the trade-off. And that's it. And I think we're doing questions after all the panel sessions are done, after all the panelists are done. Thank you.
I have to admit, this is the first time I've spoken on a panel where somebody's actually used the word crap in their presentation. So, it's kind of refreshing, actually. So I just want to start off. I started off once upon a time as a mechanical engineer. So I was really good at measuring things. So I mean, that's kind of what I did. And so I tend to use sort of benchmarks and that kind of thing when I'm dealing with clients and helping them evaluate where they are and kind of where they want to be in comparison to their competitors. And so a couple of weeks ago, I was dealing with one client. I was trying to make the point that they were, when we were reviewing their sustainability and their climate change policies, they were maybe falling behind their competitors, and they weren't quite as far advanced. And their response to me was, they said, well, you know, this is all sustainability. It's not science, and it's not this, and it's not that. And they said, and besides, you know, what we're doing is kind of like having 10,000 lawyers at the bottom of the ocean. It's a good start. And I said, well, you know, that's one thing, but at the end of the day, you've got to measure where you are in comparison to your competitors, and that's what's either going to get you in trouble, or it's going to make you look like you're a responsible corporate citizen. So I just want to talk for a couple of minutes on 3 points. Or 3 pieces of advice that are just going to tie together what my 3 co-panelists have talked about already. And one is be consistent. The second is you have to follow through. And the third is, and this is the legal side of it, you've got to put it in writing. So we've heard now a bunch of different perspectives on sort of corporate sustainability policies and what that all means and everything else. But I do think it's important for a second just to think on the very basic level of what do we mean when we're talking about a company and a corporation and who's responsible for what, because you've got a variety of different players and stakeholders involved, because you know you've got the company itself. That's a separate legal entity. It's standing over here and it's doing things as a result of what its management and directors do. But it's got an obligation to a variety of stakeholders. Its employees, its shareholders, the government, the taxpayers, everything. Shareholders, they only have an obligation really to themselves, so they're going to do whatever's in their best interest. Directors have a fiduciary obligation to the company. That's a completely different set of responsibilities. Management, their restrictions are usually contained in their employment contracts, so if you've got significant sustainability commitments, then it'll be a part of what their employment engagement is. But employees are generally, just subject to general employment law. And then you've got third parties, so that's purely contractual relationships with, say, a company like Walmart. So if you're a supplier to Walmart, you can bet there's going to be something in your arrangements with them that are going to limit you in what you say, or sorry, not what you say, but what you do and how you perform. So I think it's important. You have to think about, when we're measuring sustainability, you have to think about which part of that picture it is that we're going to measure or use to be that benchmark. So in terms of being consistent, your message just has to be the same coming from all your sources. So it has to be the same from management. It has to be the same in your shareholder materials. It has to be the same in your sort of corporate culture. Because we'll talk about in a second about what can go wrong if that's not the case. But when you're committing to doing something, and it's just like sustainability is no different than any other concept, that when you commit to doing it, if you don't hold up and you don't end up being consistent and following through, it's going to come back to bite you. So, I mean, we talked earlier about social media kind of being a new avenue or a new area that we have to worry about. That's a perfect example of where companies sometimes fall down and aren't consistent. So you've got, we can have all the management we want, giving all the speeches we want and the shareholder materials, et cetera. But if you've got an employee blogging that, the company is dumping something in the river in the back or whatever it is, you can be pretty sure that that's going to get the mainstream attention, and it's going to come back to haunt you. So you really do have to make sure that you tie everything together and you do what you say you're going to do. So following through, the reason that that's important is because people aren't going to forget. When you say you're going to do something, 6 months or a quarter from now, if you're a public company, they're going to look back on you and they're going to say, well, what did you say you were going to do, and did you do it? And it's okay not to do it, because especially in an area like climate change or sustainability or a variety of other areas, things can change. So market conditions can change, priorities can change. So you don't always have to have met your goals or what you said you were going to do, but you just have to have a good reason for not having done so. And again, so you've got to communicate that. At the end of the day, if you've got management on side, your employees are on side, and everybody's kind of rowing in the same direction, you'll have a message which you can convey that says, yes, we reached it, or no, we didn't, but here's where we're going now. And we talked earlier, or my co-panelists talked earlier, about some of the reasons or some of the things you need to know or commit to before you have a sustainability policy that you're going to put out there as what you're going to live to. So I won't go over those things again, but it really is important to know what it is you want to achieve. So your goals and your expectations and what your benchmarks are and all that stuff. It really is going to help you focus, and it's important not to overstate or try and overachieve, because it's worse to say you're going to do 10 things and only get 2 done, rather than say you're going to do 2 and actually do 2. And finally, putting it in writing. It's by far just the best way to focus a company on sustainability issues, because as we've talked about, you can go from here to here, and sustainability means a bunch of different things to a bunch of different people. But if you put it in a short, succinct policy that the directors can nod their heads and say, yes, they understand, the employees can think about how they're going to implement it day to day, how management can employ it in how it's running the company. If it's short to the point, it's probably something the lawyers can live with too, and so it can go in public company documents, and they're not going to get uptight about it being too broad or too whatever. But it's going to tie all these pieces that we've talked about, the measurement issues and sort of strong points and weak points. It's going to tie all those things together, because everybody at the end of the day is going to know exactly what the policy is and how it's measured. And the reason that that's important is now, climate change, environmental responsibility, sustainability, all that stuff, it's no longer just an add-on, something that companies do if they have time or if they have some money left over in the budget or anything like that. Now you've got, as we talked about, you've got shareholder activism to deal with. So if you're not doing the right thing, and if you're not doing what you said you're going to do, you're going to hear about it. You're going to have a shareholder meeting, and it's going to be a big open room like this, and there's going to be people outraged by what you've done or you haven't done, and you're going to have to face them, and you're going to have to deal with it. That never happened in the past. We didn't have those issues. You're going to have shareholder lawsuits. You're going to have regulators breathing down your neck. That one of the big topics for the securities regulators nowadays is in your public disclosure documents, do you accurately reflect your climate change and environmental liabilities? So again, you don't have to take every possible action to do everything to prevent every possible damage, but you have to assess what your risks are, and you have to tell people what they are, and you have to say how you're addressing them, and you better get it right. You don't have to be perfect, but you can't misrepresent what you're doing. So if you come back and you've got a tidy sustainability policy that deals with certain things that you can point to, then that goes a long way towards saying in your disclosure documents, this is where we were focused and this is what we got done. And finally, just in terms of why it's important to tie all these kind of measurement together and to sort of know what are the right measures that we need for our industry, or, because mining is different than software, for example. And we need to know, so for some companies, sustainability is, it's up here, and other companies it's down here. But one of the reasons that you have to sort of focus all that and come to a landing on those issues is if it really is important, and if you're telling people this is how we're going to be measured, so if you're telling your shareholders this is how you can measure us, and on the flip side, you're saying to people this is how we're going to measure you. So, for example, your employees, if the company is absolutely committed to a sustainability policy and it wants its employees to act a certain way, you've got to make that clear in your arrangements with them. So your employment contracts are going to reflect that this is a strong commitment of the company. It's the corporate policy is, as attached kind of thing. And it's going to work two ways. You're going to have employees that are going to say, hold on, this is not what I signed on to work for you to do. And you're going to have employees that are going to say, I'm not doing that. That's just not part of my job, and that's not part of my sort of corporate awareness or my cultural awareness. And at the same side, if you've got an employee that isn't living up to their end of the bargain in terms of commitment to the company's policies, you're going to want it in writing, and you're going to want it to have been very clear. So I will just finish with the flip side of all of this stuff, which is if you're on the legal side, if you're thinking of retaining sort of consultants to help you measure all this stuff and draft these policies and sort of get your head around this stuff, there's also considerations there to think about. So consultants they're a valuable way of getting expertise in the door that you might not have either the internal resources or people. By resources, I'm thinking mainly of financial, but or skill sets or whatever it is. So they're a great way to get in the door and have somebody give you advice on how to come up to speed on a lot of these issues very quickly. But you just have to treat it like any other professional or support tool. So you have to think about it in terms of contractual arrangements, what your measurement criteria are going to be with them, and timelines and deadlines and deliverables and all that kind of stuff. So I think I've now gone a couple of minutes over what I said I would, so I'll stop there just in case we do have any questions, and then we can take it from there. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Harvey Lowe. I'm with the City Social Research Unit. First of all, great presentations. Thank you. And again, first of all, my apologies if my question's rather blunt, but that's why you're up there and I'm down here. I wanted to ask you, I picked up on a comment that you made, David, that you said that measures should reflect stakeholders' needs. And Grant, you added to that by talking about the fact that you need to have monitor self-interest, make sure that you know that, and the hazards of misrepresentation. So my question is as follows. How do you avoid the situation, whether you're doing it for your own company or you're advising your clients, where you hear the old Mark Twain statement, lies, damn lies, and statistics? How do you prevent your reporting of statistics that solely make you look good? And try to think about reporting of metrics and sustainability indicators that should, in some respect and in some balance, reflect some of the larger altruistic measures of what you're trying to do.
Question about human resources. We understand we're going to have a challenge now and in the future attracting people to work in our public sector or private companies. And to what extent are you starting to see employees actually interviewing you and demanding to know what your corporate social responsibility actions are and so forth? Is that emerging, or is that just a myth that we're hearing?
In one of your slides, there was a quote, you needed more rigorous assessment indicators that are financially material. It's the phrase financially material that I need clarification on. And in your closing remarks, you raised the question, what 9 non-financial indicators are financially material? And I'm worried about that one because if that's the bottom line, then you really missed the point. the bottom line, what we've been trying to do for several years is to shift the focus away from what's financially relevant to what is also socially relevant and environmentally relevant. So I'd like you to unpack that phrase, financial, although I already told you how I want you to unpack it. But anyway, you do it your way, and then we'll see where it comes out.
Dan Rubenstein, I'm an auditor. I wonder why every one of you here is using the term materiality incorrectly. That's a very clear term that we auditors developed. You've imported it and you're using it inappropriately. The word is relevant, not materiality.
Thank you. It's probably a quick one to our RBC presenter. In terms of measuring performance, I'm looking at the case study of the unfortunate financial disaster of Earl Jones, where the Royal Bank was indirectly involved. So I don't know if you could touch on that. I know it's in front of the courts, but for those who don't know, a lot of investors have lost a lot of money, and now the Royal Bank is facing a civil suit on that.
For David Simmons there, and I just wanted to pick up on the reference to materiality of measures and indicators, and I'm not going to contest the term, but the use, you commented on the use of appropriate time horizons. I wondered if, in fact, you saw other factors that should be considered in that regard beyond just the short and long term, and I'm thinking particularly beyond the temporal horizons, also the spatial horizons insofar as footprint analysis is concerned.
So, a lot of questions, and you're allowed to pick out the one that you like most. So let's start with you, Grace, if it's okay.
There was one question, one of the first ones regarding the HR dimension and the war on talent. I'm teaching at a master's level course on environmental impact assessment, and I think the average age of the students is 25. And they are so green, and they're so picky about which type of company they want to work with and so forth. And we hear this all the time with our clients in terms of the war for talent and employee retention. There's a huge demand from a younger population in terms of working for the right company and doing the right thing. So I don't think it's just something out there. It's definitely a trend, and it's something definitely that companies have to face up with. That's the easy one.
Sure. I can probably answer. Is this on? Yes. I think. I can answer two. First of all, the Earl Jones one, I have no idea what you're talking about. So I'm sorry. I know about Earl Jones, but I have no idea about the lawsuit, so I can't really answer that question. I just don't know any. Okay. Well, like I said, it's not something that crosses into the corporate environmental affairs group. Yeah, he'll answer it. Right. So from the corporate environmental affairs viewpoint, I don't have any comment on it. But certainly there are probably people in the bank who could address your question if you wanted to talk to them. There was a question here about financial materiality, or maybe its relevance. I guess I think that you suggested that we're missing the point entirely. I guess one question back to you is, are you in the public sector? Yeah. So I think that for the public sector and for governments, certainly the way that sustainability or responsibility is manifested does indeed have to do with, having certain measures of success on society, the economy, and environment that are quite distinct. I think the framework that we work with is that environmental, social, and economic factors in a corporation, at the end of the day, our extensive efforts to do a good job at those ultimately are designed to improve our company's longevity, our company's shareholder value, our attractiveness to investors, our attractiveness to customers, to human capital, which really are all financial. I mean, it's a circuitous way, but certainly I don't think the public sector, and I don't expect my government to distill everything down to a financial bottom line, and hope they don't, because I do think it is their role to look out for society and the environment and externalities and so on. But I think corporations have to explain why they're spending money in certain ways. So while we have a huge philanthropic part, which is designed to give away money strictly for social benefit, we give away more money than any other company in Canada. That is philanthropy. The rest of our corporate responsibility, which is very extensive as well, and environmental programs, ultimately we filter them through the lens of, is this managing risk? Is this adding to returns? Is this improving or protecting reputation? Which ultimately, someday, should all turn into a more sustainable company. So I think it's a different lens, at least the way we look at it. Does that help?
Thank you. Greg.
I just add a couple of points to, I think, the explanation that we just heard. The one about the, do we see employees demanding to know kind of what our policy is on something and holding us accountable for it? I mean, that's what I was touching on earlier, that it works both ways nowadays. So you can't tell, when you hire employees, you have to, and they ask you questions, it's like anything else. If you lie to them or you mislead them, and then you hire them, and then they find out after the fact that you're not who you say you are, then there's going to be issues. They're going to have recourse for that kind of thing. Aside from it just being bad policy to sort of hire people under false pretenses, you just know that's not going to go anywhere. But it can come back to bite you. So you've got to, again, your message has to be consistent, and you have to be following through with it in real life. You can't put something on your website as a sort of a corporate policy, but behind the scenes be doing something else with your employees and expect that not to either leak out or work to your detriment. And the question about, kind of why is it measured financially instead of the other ways of doing it, that's the other point I talked about. You kind of have to look at, who are we measuring this for? So which stakeholder are we looking at? Until about, maybe 2 years ago, I would have said all shareholders cared about was financial measurements. They just wanted to know about return on their investment at the end of the day, and that's it. And they compared it against other investments. Now things are a little bit different, and shareholders, that might still be the primary benchmark or the primary measurement, but they're now starting to think about the other things, about the sustainability or social responsibility or whatever you want to call it. But so in part it depends on who the measurement is. If you're an employee, you're right, maybe it's not just financial measurements. They want to know that they're going to have a job 15 years from now, or their pension will be protected, or whatever it is. So, and on the materiality versus, I think, relevance issue, I mean, you could probably make arguments that it's a discussion about both, but there's certainly a concept of materiality in all of this, because corporations and employees and management and directors don't have unlimited resources, so they have to make decisions based on we've got a limited amount of time, effort, money, whatever and what are we going to direct them at? So what you do is you pick the issues that are most material to your business, your industry, your company, and you address those first.
So, David, you have the opportunity to answer all the other questions in 30 seconds.
There you go. I just, picking up on that whole question in terms of materiality, or is it relevance? I mean, essentially we're looking at relevance and significance are RESs, those kind of things, of material. And yes, Dan, IFAC, looks at, in terms of financial accounting, materiality has a particular definition. However, we are seeing that that's being adopted and appropriated in the other areas as well. The same meaning in terms of information is material if, its omission or misstatement would affect a stakeholders, decisions and actions rather than their shareholders. That's how it's being used in that area, which again is an interesting area in terms of how we're seeing, again, the accountability mechanism go from that kind of shareholder specific to much broader stakeholders, and there's much more people in the room at that point too. The question on lies, damn lies, and statistics, absolutely. One thing that we didn't pick up here necessarily is possible the need for some independent verification or assurance on those measurements. Often we treat the measurements as an end destination, and I think, as I was saying before, they're often more of a dialogic element, and that we shouldn't preserve them just because, gosh, it took us 3 years to get here. We're going to preserve onto this indicator. I mean, if we look at sustainability generally, we all think, it's cliche, we talk about sustainability, it's a journey. We have to actually really embody that. Yeah, it is a journey. We didn't arrive at the destination with, we've nailed it. There might be very few indicators on that that would allow us to do that. And the final question, I guess, on appropriate time horizons, I think absolutely. And one area, I think, where we want to engage with stakeholders, and sometimes often those stakeholders are human. I mean, one area that comes to mind in Canada, for example, is asking Canadians the importance of water. If we put that out to a general survey, Canadians have no idea about what's happening with water. And so perhaps we need to look at other elements of spatial elements, or indeed go to experts, and maybe we need to Venn diagram this in terms of, our stakeholders said, in terms of identifying what a material issue, they didn't think it was terribly material to them. However, in terms of the science on this area, we can actually see that this is an important area. So it might not rate high, but it's a big area, and it's coming down after us. So we have to understand what the indicators are going to come out of that. So I don't know if that responds to your question.